I think part of the giddiness of this situation within which the need for humans to do certain things is becoming erased in society through the advance of capitalism, technology, if you want to put it in a cheap way. The other side of that is the giddiness of the possibility of freedom. I mean, after all, freed from manual labor doesn't sound so bad. Freed from mental labor doesn't sound so bad, especially given the boring kinds computers do. You know, computers do a lot of bookkeeping and a lot of number stuff, and who in the hell likes that? Well, I mean, you know, there may be someone who does, but they can still do it as a hobby, you know. If they've got to keep some books, they can still do it. But the other side of this social system, which seems as it were to squash out what was understood as human values, and I mean now even in the broadest sense, insofar as humans thought something, did something, begins to squash that out. The other side of it is the need for the necessity of some of these things disappears and leaves open possible projects of freedom again, but at another level now. What those would look like, what they would be like, would be much different. They can't really be talked about, just like the social situation I'm trying to describe is difficult to evoke, because we're in the middle of it. You know, it's always hard to evoke the present because you're in it. It's kind of like the aquarium fish trying to describe the aquarium. I mean, it's home. You know, here I am. But what we would need and what we cannot have, in my view, is a view from outside the aquarium, so looking at it where its limits are and its boundaries. In this situation, the one I'm describing now, and trying to connect up now is the third part of my social account, and the scariest probably for me, is the culture that many of you have heard this word, the culture, which is postmodern. I think we have a very modernist economy still, a very modernist state, but when you hear the phrase postmodern culture, one of its reference is a culture based on spectacles and images that have become more real than the real thing, where Madonna is more real than your real lover, where the real thing is not God but Coca-Cola. Coke is it. You know, it. Pyrrhus. That's a strong claim. It. I mean, what do you get to be more than that? It. It's almost like a Hindu religion. You know, this is the cultural aspect of society, and culture is very important because it's where we draw our meanings from and our identities. It's in a culture that we learn how to speak a language, what our identities are. In a totally commodified culture, I mentioned, you know, phone sex and other things. In a totally commodified culture, it's hard to decide whether you have just adopted a fashion or you're developing as a person. In fact, how you could argue between the two becomes very difficult in a culture like ours. Does it mean more than you now jog and do diet pills? Does it mean something more? It becomes difficult to say what more that is. That attempt to articulate meaning finds all these bizarre outlets. Shirley MacLaine's chakras. I mean, people watch that on TV without just bursting, not in laughter, but either in laughter or tears, because when you're driven to that extreme to find some meaning, then your condition is a sickness unto death. If you're driven to that extreme to find meaning, when the only warmth you can get is to cuddle up by a flag that you're all too cynical to really believe in, that's long gone, and we all know it. The new patriotism is a cynical one in a way. We know better now, but we just have to forget that we know better. When that's your comfort, is to go into that as a kind of new lifestyle. It's sort of like yuppieism is over and greed. There must be something to give meaning. Oh, there is. I forgot about the flag. Well, what's next? Well, maybe baseball. We'll have they made a bunch of baseball movies. Maybe everybody will get back into baseball. The point here is that what these things are don't look like human choices or human values anymore, but human commodities, things you can buy. You know? I mean, you can't walk in a 7-Eleven without being able to buy a piece of identity. We all know that when you put on a hat that says Lone Star Beer, you've bought a kind of identity, but no less so than when you show up at Harvard in your little wool sweater. They code certain kinds of identities, and the fear is that beneath them, what we've understood and discussed in here as human values have been, as it were, dried up by the very ability to market them, by the ability to turn them into goods for sale, and worse than that, into images and into cultural products, of which each one of us has the trouble of saying, you know, as I say, why we're not one. How could I not be aware of this as we film this, right? Because I have no control over the image production in a certain sense, and even the people who film and so on, it goes beyond that. We're in a telematic world in that sense, where you can have a revolution in Beijing, have the pictures over here in 2 minutes, and then forget about it in a month, and 3 months later have one of the people on the Phil Donahue show. That kind of society produces different kinds of people. The question is whether we still want to call them that or not. At a certain point, we don't. I don't. Anyway, this is my view. When they reach, I call it the DQ threshold, the Dan Quayle threshold. Beneath that, I cease to give an analysis of human values or the subject. Beneath that threshold, I am dealing with what Descartes called cleverly constructed automatons, dealing with people without affect. In other words, they can fake affect. They can pretend to be moved, but can't be moved. You know, where being moved was an inner relation. I'll try another example to evoke this postmodern scene that I'll discuss again in the next lecture. Not using Kierkegaard, but using a little Freud, but what the hell, something. Measure the distance this way. Try to measure the distance between Wuthering Heights and the interior of reading that novel, Wuthering Heights. You know, that's a love story. I mean, it's really a love story because it's scary and crazy and embodied like love. It's nuts. And the guy loves the woman so much he'll follow her forever and drive her crazy, even into hell if she does. You know, it's a loony, scary novel, but it has a tangible feel and it has affect, and that is what I'm coding as still real. Now let's compare that to love story. One way to measure the historical distance we've come is by measuring the distance between Wuthering Heights and love story. I don't know what you thought about the movie, but the book's real short. And my own feeling was that him having a lot of money didn't hurt. Didn't hurt a bit. There's an immense distance that's been traveled by human subjectivity, humans as subjects, between Wuthering Heights and love story, and I hate to say it, there's been some distance traveled between love story and now, and movies like Heathers, Blade Runner, or just visiting Los Angeles. I mean, I don't need to use examples, just visit Los Angeles. Just walk down the Walk of Stars at 1 o'clock in the morning and ask yourself, are these people really here, or is this central casting? And it isn't a funny question. And as our society develops in this telematic way, it's not going to be funny to ask it around the Christmas dinner table about Uncle Henry. Is that Uncle Henry? Or is it just someone playing Uncle Henry? The further postmodern insight is, what difference does it make? See, that's the thing that Reagan's handlers understood. It doesn't make any difference. They're buying it. Well, that's all I have to say for now.